Denzel Washington walked onto the set of a live leadership summit in Los Angeles, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his stride calm and deliberate. The event was supposed to be straightforward, a panel about integrity, faith, and mentorship, topics Denzel had spoken on many times. The crowd of young professionals and students cheered as he took his seat. His presence alone brought silence, the kind that precedes wisdom. The host smiled and leaned in. "Mr. Washington, as always, it's an honor to have you here." "Thank you," Denzel replied, voice smooth, but with weight. "If what I say helps even one person out there, then I'm grateful for the platform." He was halfway through a powerful story about his mother, how she prayed over him every night during his rebellious teenage years. When something unusual happened, a producer rushed onto the stage, handing the host a small card. The host read it, paused, and looked stunned. "Mr. Washington," he said, clearing his throat, "we've just received a message for you. A live message from the President of Burkina Faso." Denzel blinked. "Burkina Faso?" The host nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, and it's not political, it's personal." The massive screen behind them lit up with a golden seal and the words "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." The room fell dead silent. Denzel leaned back slightly, arms folded, his eyes focused on the screen. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's hear it." The screen faded into a modest room, wooden desk, warm lighting, a Burkina Faso flag gently swaying in the background. A man with strong, clear eyes appeared, seated, posture noble yet approachable. "Mr. Denzel Washington," the president began in English, his African accent graceful. "I speak to you not as a politician today, but as a man, as a son, and as someone whose life you unknowingly helped shape." Denzel's brow furrowed. "In Burkina Faso," Traore continued, "your face may not be on every screen, but your spirit, your voice, your integrity has traveled. In my village, before I ever held a weapon to defend my people, I saw you in a film, Glory. I didn't fully understand the language, but I saw your eyes, I saw your strength, and something in me shifted." Denzel blinked, mouth tightening, eyes locked. "You played a soldier who endured pain and injustice," the president said, "and you did not blink. That night, I promised myself, I too would rise, I too would serve." The camera briefly panned across a group of young African children, watching the video beside the president. One of them clutched a DVD copy of Remember the Titans. "I have watched your interviews," the president said, voice softening. "The way you speak of your faith, your discipline, your belief in something greater than fame or money. You reminded me that to lead, a man must first kneel in humility." Denzel lowered his head slightly. "I wanted you to know, Mr. Washington, that your life planted seeds here, seeds of resilience, of dignity, of hope. I am one of them." Then Traore leaned forward, eyes intense but warm. "This message is not for television, it is for your soul. You changed the story of a young boy who watched war steal his childhood. You helped him believe in honor." The screen froze. For a long moment, Denzel sat still. The crowd didn't breathe. He finally spoke, voice low. "Play it again," he said. The audience broke into light applause, but Denzel raised his hand. "Please, no clapping. Just let me sit with this for a second." Backstage, the event organizers debated cutting to commercial, but the host shook his head. "No," he whispered. "He needs this moment, and so do we." The next morning, the video had already gone viral. News outlets from New York to Nairobi ran headlines like "President of Burkina Faso delivers emotional tribute to Denzel Washington," and "An actor's words that inspired a nation." But Denzel wasn't watching the news. He was sitting in a quiet corner of his home, the Los Angeles sun barely spilling through the blinds, rewatching the message alone. He played it again, and again, the words haunted him. Not in a heavy way, but like a song you don't want to forget. The part that gripped him most wasn't even the president's story. It was the pause, the deep silence after the words, "You changed the story of a boy who watched war steal his childhood." He didn't know what to do with that. After decades in Hollywood, Oscars, standing ovations, global recognition. Nothing had hit him quite like this, because it wasn't about talent or achievement. It was about meaning, legacy. His phone buzzed. It was his longtime friend and fellow actor, Morgan Freeman, saw the broadcast. "You all right?" Denzel responded, "Still processing." That wasn't a message. That was a calling. Morgan replied, "When the world reminds you that you matter, don't just sit with it, walk with it." That line echoed. He didn't go to set that day. He canceled interviews, skipped meetings, and walked out onto his balcony with a cup of black coffee. For a long time he just stood there, thinking. He thought about his mother, the one who raised him with discipline and prayer, about the time he almost gave up acting in his 20s, about the kids he visited in Harlem schools who called him Uncle Denzel with big expectant eyes. And then he thought about a barefoot boy in Burkina Faso who saw him in glory and decided not to quit on life. That evening, his assistant entered the study. "Mr. Washington, there's something you should see." On the iPad, she pulled up a live news feed. President Ibrahim Traoré was standing in the courtyard of a small school in Ouagadougou. Dozens of children surrounded him, each holding up a handmade sign. Some had Denzel's name, others simply read, "Thank you for your voice." Then the camera zoomed in on one little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. In her hands was a worn notebook. She stepped forward, her voice small but steady. "My name is AWA. My papa died in war. My mama is sick. But one day, I saw a movie. A man with tears in his eyes. But he never gave up. He helped me believe that one day, I can be more than my sadness." AWA opened the notebook and read, "Dear Mr. Denzel, you don't know us, but we know you. We listen to your words, even if we don't understand every sentence. We feel your strength. We pray with your movies. We believe because you believed." Denzel stared at the screen. AWA closed her book, smiled shyly, and stepped back. The children clapped. The president raised his hand and said, "He may be in America, but his heart is already here." Denzel leaned back in his chair. The room was silent. Then he whispered, "What do I do with this?" His assistant replied, "You answer the call." That night, Denzel wrote a letter, not typed, handwritten, in bold strokes of black ink. He addressed it to President Traoré. No press release, no public statement. Just a man writing to another man across the world. "Mr. President, your message moved me more than I can say. It reminded me that the true weight of our words can't be measured by applause, but by the lives they quietly touch. I've played many roles in my life, but none of them matter more than the one I didn't know I was playing. The role of hope. If I have a place in the hearts of your people, I want to see it with my own eyes. I want to meet AWA. I want to walk through the village where your grandmother's market stall once stood. Not as a celebrity, but as a brother, as a son of the same struggle. Sincerely, Denzel Washington." He folded the letter, placed it in a linen envelope, and handed it to his assistant. "No social media, just send it through the consulate. Let it find its way." Later that night, Denzel sat quietly in his private home theater. He didn't play one of his own films. He chose glory. It had been years since he watched it from start to finish. As the film played, he watched his younger self on screen, fierce, angry, unbroken, and wept quietly in the dark. The flight from Los Angeles to Ouagadougou was nearly 20 hours with layovers, but to Denzel Washington it felt like a lifetime in reflection. He wasn't flying with press or security detail, just his assistant, a translator, and 2 small bags. No tuxedos, no press suits. He wanted to arrive as simply as possible. On the way to the airport, his driver had looked in the rearview mirror and asked gently, "Mr. Washington, why now? Why this trip?" Denzel had answered with quiet certainty, "Because sometimes God sends a whisper so loud you can't ignore it." And now, somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, that whisper felt like a roar in his chest. He watched clouds drift beneath the plane, replaying moments from the message again and again in his mind. Traoré's words, Awa's voice, the handmade signs, the silence between sentences that spoke louder than applause ever could. When the plane finally landed in Burkina Faso, it was just after sunrise. The air was warm, dry, and filled with a scent, Denzel couldn't quite describe, earthy, rich, unfamiliar, but somehow comforting. A convoy was waiting for him. Not government limousines or black-tinted SUVs, just 2 old Toyota Land Cruisers and 3 local drivers with genuine smiles. A young aide stepped forward holding a simple wooden sign, "Welcome, Brother Denzel." As Denzel stepped off the plane, his shoes touched the dusty runway and his breath caught. The world felt quieter here, or maybe it was just his soul finally hearing itself. He nodded to the aide. "Thank you for having me." "We're honored," the young man replied. "The president is waiting." But the drive didn't take them to a palace. Not yet. The convoy turned away from the city center and headed toward a small village about an hour east. Along the way, children ran along dirt roads, waving wildly. Some held signs with hand-drawn portraits of Denzel. Others simply shouted, "Glory," or "Remember the Titans." He smiled, then laughed. "They know my movies?" The translator beside him chuckled. "They know your heart." When they arrived, the village was already awake with life. Women drawing water from a well, elders sitting in shaded corners sipping tea, children chasing each other barefoot with boundless energy. But when the first Land Cruiser pulled in, everything stopped. Dozens of villagers turned, eyes wide, and began to gather. Then President Ibrahim Traoré emerged from a nearby hut, not in a suit, but in traditional cloth, barefoot, with a quiet humility that spoke volumes. He walked slowly toward the vehicle as Denzel stepped out. The 2 men locked eyes, no ceremony, no speeches. Traoré opened his arms and embraced Denzel like a brother long lost. "You came," he said. "I had to," Denzel replied. They stood there for a moment, saying nothing. It was the kind of silence that held decades, lifetimes, and invisible bridges between worlds. The president gestured toward the center of the village. "There's someone I want you to meet." They walked side by side through the narrow paths between mud brick homes, past goats, and curious children. Finally, they arrived at a small mango tree near a clay school building. Under its shade stood AWA. She wore a bright yellow dress, faded at the edges, and clutched her notebook to her chest like it was treasure. Her eyes were wide, nervous, hopeful. Traoré stopped a few feet away. "AWA," he said gently. "He's here." Denzel took a deep breath and approached slowly, his own hands shaking. He knelt so he could look her in the eyes. "You must be AWA," he said softly. She nodded barely above a whisper. "Yes." "May I see your notebook?" Without a word, she handed it to him. He opened it and saw the letter again, written in imperfect English, full of emotion and innocence. He read it silently, tears beginning to pool. When he finished, he looked up at her. "I came all this way," he said, voice cracking, "because your words found me. And I want you to know, I believe in you too." AWA was lip trembled. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and hugged him. The villagers around them clapped quietly. Some wiped tears, and Denzel, still kneeling, whispered, "Thank you, little sister." Later that afternoon, Traoré led Denzel to the old market stall where his grandmother used to sell fruit. The wooden beams had mostly collapsed, but a few rusted nails and scattered baskets still marked the space. "This," Traoré said, "is where I first heard your voice, on a crackling radio." My grandmother didn't understand the words, but she felt the power. He bent down, picked up a small smooth stone, and handed it to Denzel. "She would have called you her son," Traoré said. "This is from her stall. Keep it." Denzel took the stone, closed his fist around it, and nodded. "I don't have words, only gratitude." As the sun dipped low, the president and the actor sat together on 2 wooden stools, sipping ginger tea. Children played nearby. A gentle wind rustled the tree leaves above them. Denzel turned to his host. "I came here thinking I was giving something, but it's me who's receiving." Traoré smiled. "The world doesn't need more noise, Mr. Washington. It needs more heart. You brought yours." That night, as stars filled the African sky, Denzel lay awake under a mosquito net in a modest guest hut. In his hand was the small stone from the market, and in his heart was something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the village. filtering through the woven reed windows of the guest hut. Denzel awoke before dawn, the sounds of roosters and distant chatter blending with a strange new rhythm that was already beginning to feel familiar. Outside, the village was stirring. Women swept the earth with bundled straw brooms, and children began their morning chores. But today was different. There was an energy in the air, anticipation, like the world was holding its breath for something sacred. Denzel stepped outside and was greeted by the soft voice of the young translator. President Traoré requests your presence at the school. The children have prepared something special, still barefoot, still wearing the simple white linen shirt gifted to him the night before. Denzel walked the narrow path through the village, with dust rising gently at his feet. He passed elders who smiled without speaking, only nodding deeply in respect. He nodded back, placing a hand over his heart. As he reached the schoolyard, he saw a small gathering under the large mango tree. Wooden benches were arranged in rows, and a makeshift stage of flattened crates stood at the front. The children, all ages, all sizes, sat cross-legged, eyes wide with excitement. President Traoré stood waiting at the side, hands clasped behind his back, dressed again in traditional attire, this time with the ceremonial sash of his country draped across one shoulder. He gestured toward the bench next to him. Sit, brother, watch what they have prepared. Denzel sat down, unsure of what was about to unfold. The sun filtered through the mango leaves, dappling the children's faces with light. Then the drums began, soft at first, barely audible. A rhythm built gently from the hands of two teenage boys, tapping hollow gourds. Then the voices came, a chorus of children's voices, pure and untrained, sang in the native tongue of Moray. Though Denzel didn't understand the words, he felt the message. The melody was hauntingly familiar, ancient and full of warmth. He blinked, confused. Why did it stir something so deep in him? He turned to the translator. What are they singing? The translator, teary-eyed, leaned closer. It is a lullaby, a song President Traoré's grandmother used to hum while selling fruit. The children sing it now in her honor, but also for your grandmother. Denzel's breath caught. He stared ahead as the melody washed over him. It was soft, steady, almost like a whisper from a memory. The tune, though foreign, rang inside his bones. It was the same kind of hum his own grandmother used to sing in the projects of New York when he cried as a child. A song without words, only comfort. Two grandmothers, two continents, one melody. When the song ended, the children clapped for themselves, laughing and bowing. A WA, now more confident than the day before, stepped forward, holding something in her hands. It was a carved wooden statue, two open hands, holding a heart. She handed it to Denzel and spoke in English this time. This is for you, because you held our hearts, even when you didn't know it. Denzel took it in both hands. He couldn't speak. His lips trembled as he stood, lifting the statue gently. I don't deserve this, he said. President Traoré placed a hand on his shoulder. That's why you do. The villagers applauded softly, not as fans, but as family. Denzel stepped forward and turned to them, eyes glistening. I have received many awards in my life, gold statues, standing ovations, but none like this, he said, lifting the wooden carving. This is my greatest honor. The moment lingered like a prayer in the wind. Later that afternoon, President Traoré invited Denzel on a quiet walk outside the village. They strolled along a dusty path, the tall grass brushing against their arms. Birds chirped in the trees above, and every few minutes, villagers passed by on bicycles or carts, each tipping their heads with reverence. I want to show you something, Traoré said. They stopped at a small clearing, surrounded by sunflowers and quiet trees. At the center stood a tree, old, thick, and twisted with time. A wooden bench sat beneath it, worn and smooth. This, said Traoré, is where I made the decision to join the army. I was only 16. My grandmother had just passed. I sat under this tree and listened to your voice on a borrowed radio. You were speaking at a college. You said dreams without goals are just dreams. And ultimately, they fueled disappointment. I didn't understand everything, but I understood purpose. Denzel sat slowly on the bench. You remembered all that? Traore nodded. When a man has nothing, words are all he has, and yours stayed with me. The president reached into his satchel and pulled out a rolled-up document, tied with red thread. He handed it to Denzel. What is this? Denzel asked. A deed, Traore said quietly. This land, it's yours now, a gift from Burkina Faso. Denzel's eyes widened. I can't accept land from your people. You can, Traore said gently, because it's not just land. It's memory, it's heritage. It's proof that your words built something here, something that will last. Denzel looked around. The wind rustled the sunflowers. The old tree swayed ever so slightly. In that moment, he felt the burden of fame lift, replaced by something weightier: legacy. I'll build a reading library here, he said softly. For the children, a place where words can live. Traore smiled. Then it is already holy ground. They sat together until the sun dipped low, saying little. Just two men, one once barefoot in war, the other once directionless in New York, sitting on a bench under an African sky, united by grandmothers, by struggle, by hope. The day of departure arrived quietly. There were no official parades, no flashing cameras, no celebrity spectacle, just the soft rustle of wind in the village trees, and the silent gathering of dozens of children, elders, and villagers under the rising sun, waiting to say goodbye. Denzel Washington stood at the edge of the village, a worn satchel slung over his shoulder. He had traded his crisp American wardrobe for a simple cotton tunic made by local artisans. In his hand, he carried only two things: a carved wooden statue and the deed to the land beneath the sunflower tree. President Traoré approached slowly. You sure you want to leave without a formal farewell? He asked. Denzel nodded. This was never about formalities. You welcomed me like family. That's more than enough. Awaz appeared beside them, her eyes shy but steady. She held a small folded letter in her hands. I wrote you one more note, she said. Denzel knelt beside her, accepted it with reverence, and placed it gently into the inner pocket of his tunic. Thank you, he whispered. I'll carry your voice with me, and we will carry yours, she replied. Before leaving, Denzel asked for one final moment under the mango tree. The villagers followed, forming a circle of quiet reverence as he stepped into the center. He looked up at the leaves, the sunlight slipping through, just as it had days earlier when the children sang. He raised the wooden carving above his head, not as a trophy, but as an offering. This heart, he said, his voice steady, belongs to all of us now. Then he turned to the children. Don't stop dreaming, but don't just dream. Build, read, love each other. You don't need to be famous to be powerful. You just need to care. The silence that followed was holy. As Denzel climbed into the vehicle, a wave of small hands reached for him, hands clapping, waving, touching his arm one last time. Awaza stood back, hand over her chest, tears forming, but not falling. Strong, like the leaders she admired. The convoy pulled away slowly. Denzel kept the window open, watching the village shrink in the distance. His fingers absently traced the edge of the carved heart in his lap. The drive back to the capital was long, quiet. The city buzzed with life, markets, horns, people, but Denzel didn't hear it. His mind was full of mango trees, old radios, lullabies, and a little girl who called him brother. At the airport, a security officer stopped him before boarding. Mr. Washington, the man said in halting English, thank you for remembering us. Denzel placed a hand on the officer's shoulder. Halls, no.
Institutions.
Thank you for never forgetting yourselves. The flight back to Los Angeles felt shorter, though the hours passed the same. This time, Denzel didn't watch a film. He didn't read. He just sat still, hands folded, Awa's final letter in his lap. As the plane touched down, the city greeted him with its usual neon sprawl and chaos. His assistant asked, would you like to call the press? Let them know you're back. He shook his head. No cameras, no headlines. This one's just for me. At home, Denzel returned to his study. The room was quiet, lined with awards and scripts, trophies and accolades, but it felt different now. Smaller, or perhaps he had grown. He placed the wooden heart at the center of the shelf, above his Oscars. Then slowly, he opened Awa's final letter. Dear brother Denzel, I used to think famous people lived in the sky, that they were stars we could never touch. But now I know, stars walk on earth too. And sometimes they visit little girls in yellow dresses and remind them that their voice matters. Thank you for coming. I will never forget your eyes. Your sister, AWA. He pressed the letter to his lips. That week he didn't return to filming. Instead, he called architects and educators. Within days, he'd sent a team to begin construction on the reading library he promised. He named it Awa's Place, a house for words. He also sent a scholarship fund to the village, enough for every child to attend secondary school and for the teachers to be trained with new materials. But Denzel didn't stop there. During his next public speech, a leadership conference for thousands of youth across America, he walked on stage holding a picture of AWA and a sunflower. This is the face of a world changer, he said. He told the whole story, not to inspire pity or applause, but to spark movement, to remind people that hope isn't reserved for the rich, that sometimes the loudest truths come from the smallest voices. After the speech, the internet exploded. Hashtags trended. #Denzel. In Burkina #hearts across oceans #Awa's Place. But Denzel stayed quiet online. Because to him, it wasn't about trending. It was about planting. And back in Burkina Faso, under the mango tree, AWA and the children now gathered every week at the construction site. They wrote poems, read stories, sang that same grandmother's song. They didn't know if Denzel would ever return, but they knew he had never truly left. Because when someone sees you, truly sees you, and calls you family, they never really go. They stay in your voice, in your steps, in your soil. And as the wooden doors of Awa's Place were opened for the first time, carved above them were the words, "Let every word be a seed."